I'm Loraine Ballard Morrill, and as we mark the 70th anniversary of WDAS, it is my incredible honor and pleasure to introduce Cody Anderson. Cody Anderson was president and general manager of WDAS during one of its great heydays, and we're going to talk a little bit about your history with WDAS and what WDAS means to our community. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. And Cody, tell us, how did you start at WDAS?
Well, I actually started as an account executive. I knew a guy, I went to college rather, with a guy named Loraine Taylor's wife. Loraine Taylor was the assistant general manager at DAS. And I had been working at OIC and was getting ready to take a job as a federal narcotics agent.
Really?
Yeah. And
Wow.
he called me. We went to dinner, my wife and he and his wife. And he asked, my wife wasn't that sold on me doing that. So he asked me if I had any interest in becoming an account executive. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, actually, it's a salesperson. So I said, well, I mean, I could try it. So at the time, I was working at First Pennsylvania Bank in management training. I did a lot of different things, Loraine. So I quit my job, gave them 2-week notice. And he told me that the day before I was supposed to start, he told me that I had to see one more person. I said, well, LeBaron already quit my job. He said, well, it should be okay. So I was a little anxious about it, and he took me the next day. I met him at the station, and he took me to meet this guy, the general manager, who had the final say. Prior to that, I played basketball in college and some ball after college, a little semi-pro. And I used to play basketball with I used to go to the Philadelphia Athletic Club with my father-in-law, who was a member. And at that time, it was a very kind of a racial and racist environment.
Mhm.
There were 2 blacks that were members of that club, he and Judge Leon Higginbotham. So I used to go down with him and play ball before he would go and work out. And one of the guys recognized me playing ball and asked me to play for their team. So I said, okay. So I go down every day for practice, every other day. And these guys, before our practice would start, these guys would be out on the floor, a bunch of guys, old white guys, running up and down the floor, beating each other up. And there was this one guy who was very competitive, and he befriended me. He said to me, come on and play with us, So I did, and I controlled the game, and I let him win, and he loved that. I never knew his name. We didn't talk much. After our practice start, he'd leave and I wouldn't see him anymore. Well, the day that I went out for that last interview, he was the one that was the person.
And who was
Bob
that?
Bob
Bob
Klein.
Klein. Oh my gosh, how funny.
Yes. So Bob Klein embraced me. He took to me as a son. He trained me.
Mm.
He took me to all sorts of places. He allowed me, like you were allowed, to express myself in the community, to come up with programs and initiate any number of things. So I gradually went from a salesperson to become his assistant general manager. LeBaron left and went to CBS.
Well, so you moved up the ranks and eventually became the general manager for WDAS. At that time, during the time in which you worked at WDAS, there were some legendary personalities there. I wonder if you can talk about working with some of those legendary personalities.
Uh, they were outstanding. It took me a moment because I was an outsider for them to accept me. Jim, you're talking about Jimmy Bishop, Georgie Woods, um, Larry Daly, um, Butterball, Carl Helm. These were all guys who were there. And slowly but surely, they kind of embraced me. And especially Georgie Woods.
Mm.
And Georgie kind of like, I used to follow him around. Georgie showed me a little bit about radio, what radio was about. Georgie, I remember going with him one time to meet Don King at the Philadelphia airport. He was going to give him turkeys to give away for a holiday. We actually went to the side of the airport. They opened the gate and we went out on the runway
Wow.
because it was Georgie Woods,
Uh-huh.
and we went up. He talked to Don King for a while, got the check for the turkeys. Don King got back on his plane and flew off. That's when I realized how big Georgie was. So these were the kind of things that I encountered. Jimmy Bishop, Jimmy Bishop was a master on the radio. He would sometimes go away because he was working with recording artists at the time, Barbara Mason and others. And he would like disappear for 2 and 3 days. And and he was the program director. So they used to think, oh, okay, this is going to be it for Bishop. So Bishop would finally come back in. He would walk over to Bob Klein's office. He'd come out smoking a cigar, go right up on the air and hit it like nothing had happened. These guys were the ultimate professionals, and they were a part of the entertainment. But the person who made me understand really how effective and influential radio was was Harvey Holiday.
Mm.
Harvey was on the FM playing oldies. And, I would stop in on Sunday and sit with Harvey for a little while. And one time he said to me, I want to show you something. I said, okay. He took phone calls. And the first call he took, it was like it was opened up into the middle of an argument. This one is better. Who recorded that? Who recorded this? And they said, Harvey, who did this? And Harvey told them the answer and they hung up talking. I said, wow, that's interesting. Then the second caller called and she said, Mr. Holiday, with an accent, I'd like for you to play a song for me and dedicate it to my friend. He says, okay. She said, I want you to play I Don't Hurt Anymore. And I start pounding my heart. I mean, that showed me how in tune people were to that station at the time.
Mm.
And at the time, it was all that this community had.
I wonder if you can talk about the transition from AM to FM, because in its heyday, WDAS AM was the station, but
Yes.
then the FM came into play, and there was a transition from AM to FM. Tell us more about that.
That was an interesting transition because on the FM at that time, Max Leon, who owned the station, his son was running it. And they were playing underground music, and it wasn't really doing anything, but it had the better signal, the FM. So Bob Klein saw, he had tremendous insight. He felt that he wanted to take that same type of format and switch it to the FM. And we recruited DJs. I think at that time he had Wayne. I don't know, Wayne Joe, Jim. What was Jim's last name? Dan Henderson, Perry Johnson, Tony, I believe, was a part of that first group. And they started playing album cuts. And they were selecting their own cuts. And this kind of took off because it was different, very little talk, just a little. They all started establishing their own identity. Tony Brown came up with Beaming You into the Universe. As a matter of fact, I'm still up there somewhere because I was beamed, and they had Wayne Joel who would tell a story with his music by playing 2 or 3 of them back to back. And eventually, because it reached so many other areas outside of Philadelphia, it started getting numbers. And of course, we had issues with the rating service, ARB. And Bob Klein instituted a lawsuit against them, which forced them to change to telephone retrieval as a method, as opposed to the diary. When that happened, Black radio shot up, not just in Philadelphia, but all over the country. But it was a little animosity for a while between the old head AM jocks and the FM guys. And eventually there had to be a transition. Butterball was smart enough to move to the FM and sustained himself, but he eventually changed the AM station to talk and more of a community service type of a station to support that which the FM was not doing in terms of public service and community outreach.
Speaking of community outreach, WDAS has had a long history of being a community radio station, and a time that was so important was certainly during the civil rights movement. And Bob Klein was very, very instrumental in helping fund civil rights leaders and the movement. And the station itself hosted uh, like icons like Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and so many others. And I wonder if you can talk a bit about what the station's legacy is in terms of the tremendous reach and influence it had during that civil rights movement and into the 70s and 80s.
Well, Georgie Woods, more than anyone else, was active. The others, they would do what was programmatically there for them, but Georgie Woods was out into the community. Georgie marched with Cecil and Dr. King. Prior to George and that group, there was a guy named Jim Clash and Joe Rainey. And Joe Rainey is the one that first interviewed Malcolm. But King constantly, whenever he came to Philly, was a part of the programming. Georgie Woods was just, he was Philadelphia's son. Everybody loved Georgie Woods. There was a riot shortly after or right before I came to DAS in North Philadelphia. I know you might remember those riots. Georgie Woods went down there and calmed it.
Mm.
He was just loved. Georgie Woods, and I know I'm getting a little bit off your topic, but you can't talk about DAS without talking about Georgie Woods.
Yeah.
Georgie Woods could walk down the street anywhere in North Philadelphia, and it was a long journey because he got stopped every step along the way. Georgie would go into anybody's house and eat and have dinner. He was probably more responsible for the image that DAS had, or the reputation that they had as being a community station. I actually learned a lot from George and start implementing things like voter registration. We must have been registered one time over 100,000 people.
Wow.
I remember when the MOVE bombing, at that time, we raised funds for the victims of the MOVE bombing. Just little things like that we started doing. But Bob Klein was the reason for it. As you so rightfully mentioned, he was the active one. He was the one that knew all of these folks, from Muslims, to every segment of that community. Bob Klein was involved with Cecil Moore. I first met Cecil through Bob Klein, Ethel Allen, just a myriad of folks that he introduced me to, because again, I was from outside of Philadelphia, but he was in the heart of it.
I'd like to talk about one of the signature events that WDAS sponsored for so many years, and that was Unity Day. Mm-hmm. Tell us how Unity Day got started.
Actually, when I say I had people working with me. We wanted to put on an event that would bring political leaders together with the community, where they would have a chance to interact with them in a fun environment. So we decided to do and call it Unity Day. The first event was held at Belmont Plateau. That's when I met Bruce Holberg, because he crashed our event. But
Bruce Holberg was the former general manager of, at that time, the rival station Power 99.
That's right. So we were at the Belmont Plateau. Sister Sledge were the cheerleaders. Cecil Moore was the honorary umpire. We had Congressman Bill Gray, Ed Rendell, the school board president at the time. We just had all of the legislators that people had only heard their voices but never really interacted with, against an all-star team from the DJs and members of the staff. And Coca-Cola was the sponsor. And it was just a really extraordinary day. And we maybe had 20,000 people out there that day at Belmont Plateau. The next year, we decided to take it to a larger venue. So we went to Lee Cultural Center, located at Haverford, at the end of Haverford, and I think 43rd. where Bob Klein asked this gentleman named Walt Palmer to come in and help us organize community booths and informational booths. So aside from entertainment and the softball game, we then had community information booths all over the place. So Bill Green was running for mayor at the time, and Bill Green came and was walked all throughout the event and was totally taken back by it. The next one, Wilson Goode was the mayor. We had been involved in helping Wilson Goode become elected. So I went to meet with Wilson Goode, a group of us, and I said to him, I'd like to bring Unity Day downtown. He called his whole staff in, his whole cabinet, had them sit with us and tell them to give me whatever I wanted. So my crew and I went down the night before Unity Day and marked off spaces on the street while traffic was still moving. You know, so we dart out and mark a space and get out of the way of traffic. Kathy Amoroso and Linda Timmons and Ducky were all the ones who were out there working along with us doing that. We only charged about $15 or $20 for the space for the vendors because it wasn't about making money. We wanted to give the vendors an opportunity to make money. The $15 or $20 that we charged, we gave to a charity. That Unity Day proved to be extraordinary. The next year, we went back to Center City and we had Harry Belafonte as our marshal. And the day was dedicated to freeing Nelson Mandela. So it was another one that was extraordinary. The last one that we did down there was I let my Mimi Brown and some of the other younger announcers talk me into having rap. I was not a fan of rap, I have to tell you.
Okay.
And I agreed, and they had a guy named Captain Sky. Captain Sky would put on this hood and this cape, and I was backstage while he was getting dressed, and I couldn't do nothing but laugh at him. I said, man, they're gonna tear that stuff off of you. Somebody lit a firecracker and people started stampeding all over the place. I mean, it was out of control. And he came back to the area where we were and his cape was all torn and ripped off of him. But that showed me that you cannot mix entertainment for young folks and adult folks. It doesn't match well. But that was the only one that we had any kind of trouble or incident.
Well, Unity Day became the largest outdoor African-American based event in the nation. Right. At its very height. I don't know, you had 500,000 people up there. I mean, you had there are a lot of folk out there.
Loraine, the one thing that you and I know is that they couldn't count.
I know, right?
There were all kind of estimates all over the place. All I know is that a lot of people. So
yeah, as far as the eye can see, from the Art Museum steps to City Hall, it was just solid people. So you've gone in lots of different directions. You became the owner of WHAT
yes.
after you ended up at WDAS. And you've always been committed to Black voices and providing an opportunity for Black voices and community outreach to be a part of who you are and what you do. And I wonder if you can talk a little more about why that's so important to you.
Well, first of all, if you looked at the makeup of the Philadelphia radio industry, there were few outlets for Black folks. Not just elected officials, but just for Black folks until Bruce Holberg interjected the Urban Contemporary. WDAS was the only story. But it goes back beyond that because I was raised in Chicago, in the projects in Chicago. And I got to see all kinds of things, you know, people being put out of their homes and people struggling and families coming together. I saw the best and worst of that kind of life. And I think it kind of stayed with me those things that I saw, and it kind of influenced the direction that I wanted to go into, the compassion that I had for people. Seeing my friends come home and not know whether or not there was going to be a 5-day notice on their door where they would be put out.
Mm.
I saw those things. I saw the mayor who was so strong in Chicago, and how, you know, everybody had off on that particular day because they had to go and vote. There were just so many things that I saw during my time growing up in that community. Actually, it's the community that Barack Obama did his social work in. But I saw so many things, Loraine, that I think that just shaped me. And we all have had those experiences, but I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to implement some of the things based upon what I had experienced.
Mm.
So it was not anything that I sat down and planned. It was just something that came out. The compassion, the sensitivity, it just came out in a lot of the things that we did.
Well, I think that just is really who you are. And I have to share a little story of my own, because when I started working at Power 99 in 1983, I would encounter you from time to time because we were at that time rivals in radio, WDAS and Power 99. But I have to say that in every single encounter that I had with you, you were always kind and generous, and always really going out of your way to make me feel comfortable. I was new. I was a new kid on the block. And you absolutely were so kind. I always remember how good you were to me at a time when it was tough. Sometimes I'd go into a room and tell them that where I was working, and people would turn away because it was that kind of, DAS at that time was so revered. And to have an upstart radio station like Power 99 come in, people felt some kind of way about it, but you didn't. You were always more than kind and generous with your spirit and your time. And so for that, I always have been appreciative of you.
Well, you didn't carry yourself like a competitor, Loraine. You were just as you are now. You know, you were nice. I don't know if you actually knew what you were getting yourself into going out there doing that community work.
Right.
Oftentimes, you stuck out in a lot of those crowds, and I always felt a need to try and make you comfortable, but it's what you brought to the table. And I used to say, damn, who is that coming out here again? She's everywhere, and you had a lot of nerve and courage to come into those groups, those communities as an outsider, because Power 99 at the time was an outsider, and you just did your job. You kept your head up, you didn't get discouraged, you were friendly, and so you earned whatever respect it was that that you received.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have to ask you, so in your long career, especially as it encompasses the history of WDAS, what can you say that people should remember you for? What do you think has been your legacy as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of WDAS?
uh I would imagine the commitment to the community, the fact that this community needed a voice. Um, One of my dear friends, who you probably know something about, Dr. Walter Lomax, who often came to me and we would have these heart-to-heart talks. He was a supporter when I was struggling at HAT. And when I left and I started this other radio station, WURD, I did it as a lease purchase. Okay. Um, and it was time to purchase it. And I wasn't about to get into another purchase situation. I had my struggles, and I got out unscathed, my wife and family and but I knew that this community still needed that voice. Uh, and I had a conversation with him, and I talked to him about purchasing it, and he agreed. And one of his aides came to me a day before the FCC was to approve it. And they said to me, "You better talk to Doc because he's changing his mind about buying the station." And I said, "Well, what am I going to tell him? I can't tell him how to spend his money." They said, "Just call him." So I called Dr. Lomax and I said, "Hey, Doc, how are you? It's Cody." He says, "Hey, Cody, how are you?" And then there was silence. He said, "So, well, you heard." I said, "Well, yeah, I heard, Doc, that you had changed your mind." He said, "Well," I said, "Well, I can't tell you how to spend your money. I'm not going to try to talk you into it." I said, "But I will tell you this. Everybody in this city knows that you have money, and you cannot give everybody in this city money, but you can give them a voice."
Mm.
That resonated with him, and he paused for a minute and he says, "Oh, okay." So that to me defined what I've always wanted to do, to
Mm.
give somebody a voice. And I used to always say, no voice is special until it's been heard. What distinguishes you from another person out in the community is the exposure. Okay. And then what you do with it after that. A lot of the hosts that we had in a competitive market had no radio experience, but they came on. And once they did that, their voice became important in this community. And that to me is the perhaps single most important thing.
Well, I think that is absolutely your legacy, is allowing people who had no voice to have a voice, to provide a platform, whether it was DAS or HAT or URD. You have allowed that to happen. And for that, we really appreciate you. Your legacy is deep and important, and you are a giant in the radio business. And we wanted to acknowledge you for everything that you've contributed to radio and Black radio in particular, and to our community.
Well, Loraine, I thank you and I appreciate that. And you tell the other member of that puppy group, Mimi and Jerry and Doug and Tony, you tell them all I said hello because you're all really great people.
Well, I'm sure they will be happy to hear that, and thank you for spending time with us as we once again mark the 70th anniversary of WDAS, the legacy, the history, and you are certainly very much a part of that beautiful, glorious history of a radio stations that made such a huge difference and continue to do that in Philadelphia and beyond. Thank you, Cody.
Thank you. Thank you, Loraine. I appreciate that.